S.D.A to say the opening prayer for us. So wherever you may be, please pray with us.
Beloved, shall we pray? Our most gracious and everlasting Father, we thank you for how far you brought us today and for the opportunity to meet this afternoon to continue in worship. We commit this afternoon's program into your hands, that you come and take your rightful place, speak through the facilitators, let us be well equipped about what we are going to discuss, so that we'll be good implementers of it, and at the end, we'll give glory to your holy name. Be with each and everyone listening online or present here at church, that at the end of today's discussion, we would have learned a lot to impact those who we come into contact with. This is our humble prayer this afternoon. In Jesus' mighty name have we prayed. Amen.
Thank you, S.D.A. To begin, I hope we all know, those of us in Bethel Church, that this is an Adventist men's ministry program. So we'll respectfully call our leader, Brother Joseph Abene to give us some introductory remarks.
Good afternoon and happy Sabbath to you all. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Today we are having the third in a series of our virtual meeting program. And this afternoon we are going to have a very insightful and educative program on the topic estate planning and wills. This program is so important because, especially in our part of the world, we have a certain kind of misconception or myth about will. People even think that when you put down your will, it means that you are ready to die, but that is not it. This afternoon, these and many other areas we are going to have a look at. And we as Bethel Arm, one of our objectives is to make sure that we build the capacity of our men, as well as the members of our church. And therefore, this is part of the reason why we are organizing this program this afternoon. So a warm welcome to all of you. Those of you who have joined us online, please send a link to other friends to also join, so that all of us can share in this knowledge. A special welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Joseph. I think at this juncture, I would go into the meat of the matter. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22 tells us that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. Amen. And it is critical that in doing so, we do it right, so that whatever it is that we intend would actually be so when we are no more. We should endeavor not to leave things for other people to decide for us. And that is exactly the essence of our meeting here, to discuss estate planning and will. We accept and acknowledge that this is a very technical area. And so to do so, we have in our midst to help us digest our brother, who is a lawyer by profession. He is a man of only one wife. And he was called to the bar in 2018. He's a lawyer. Our brother, Aurelius Lamte, would help us to digest the matter. I would want to suggest that please let us hold on to our questions. We can post them. I would want him to flow, because this is a very technical area for which we need some legal expertise. When he is done, whatever questions that we may have, you can call in or post the questions, I'll read it for him to answer. So, Brother Aurelius, the audience are we. Thank you.
Yes, hello. And good afternoon as well, and a happy Sabbath. It is indeed a pleasure to come before you this afternoon to have a discussion on estate planning with an emphasis on wills, because as we go along, we realize that there is more to estate planning than just having a will. There are different components. So without much ado, we'll kickstart the presentation. So estate planning, when we talk of estate planning, it refers to the determination of how one's assets, okay, will be managed or distributed in the event of one's death or disability. So basically, what you are intending to do, okay, let me see that. Just a second, I'm trying to share the screen.
Hello. So as Brother Aurelius shares his screen with us, I would humbly ask that please let us put down notes, because for some of these things, you would have to pay good money to be able to assess the kind of information he's giving to us. And like I said at the beginning of this program, let us endeavor to jot or write down our questions and then either call in or you can post your questions, we'll see and we'll respond. Thank you. If you do not plan your estate, like I mentioned at the beginning, either the government would plan for you, or maybe your family would have a fight after you are gone. And since we are Christians, we do not want any of that to happen. Now, Brother Aurelius has been able to share his screen, so we go back and continue. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, like I was saying, a lot goes into estate planning than just, having a will. Because like the definition of estate planning says, it's basically determining how your assets will be managed or distributed in the event of death or disability. Okay. Because death is one inevitable thing about life, which we need to plan for, in as much as we do not know when the Lord in his own wisdom would call us. And disability is also something which may occur. So it is advisable that as young men and young women who are working, earning some income, it's best to gather your assets into a basket and learn how to manage them, and also plan ahead as to how it's going to be distributed in the event of death. So estate planning involves things such as having a life insurance, if you're having a funeral insurance, a disability insurance, the creation of a trust, and a will, which is the emphasis for today. For life insurance, the insurance policies, I believe, would maybe have another resource person later on to discuss that. But basically, you can just go to any insurance company and have a discussion on any of these three that are displayed on the screen. For a trust is a legal instrument, okay? It's a legal construct where your asset is placed in either in your name or in the name of another person for the benefit of certain named individuals. So for example, a father can hold a house, okay, or real estate on trust for himself, his children, and probably his spouse. So it is a means of securing the interest of knowing that once they are beneficiaries, okay, they would be able to benefit in event of your death or disability. With regards to you can, a will is defined as, the written expression, okay, of the last wishes of someone who is referred to as a testator, okay. Now, this can determine how property should be disposed of in the event of death. And by doing so, you are actually naming certain individuals who would come to define later as who would actually carry on this mission in your absence. Now, a will is also a legal instrument, just like a trust. Now, the law governing the creation, construction, interpretation, and actually enforcement of a will, the Wills Act 1971, Act 360. So that actually gives legal basis to the existence of a will, how you can make a will, the manner in which the will is supposed to take in order for it to be effected. So we go all of these things to examine the validity and also okay. So before we go into that discussion, let's look at certain key definitions, because these are technical terms which we'll be running throughout. So I believe it's incumbent for us to, come to terms as to what they mean before I start using them, frequently as we are running through. So the first thing we need to take note of is an estate, okay? So an estate is not an estate in the sense of how we used it in a late 10, because you go and say, okay, fine, this is Kwarapo estate, this is Regiment Ogre estate. No, it's not a collection of real estate properties. An estate in this sense refers to the assets of a deceased person. Okay, the assets of a deceased person. So let's say John Brown's estate, Kojo Nkrumah's estate, and so on and so forth. Okay. Then we have the testate or testator. Now,
okay.
This is where we refer to him as dying testate. Then the person who actually made the will, he referred to that person as the testator. So the person is not testate. He died testate. That refers to the status in which he died. Then his status with reference to the will is the testator. Now, an intestate refers to a person who dies without making a will. So again, example, Kojo Nkrumah died intestate. So for that one, we know that he died without leaving a will. So that's clear. So either the person died testate or the person died intestate. Then we move on to executor, executrix. Now, executor is the male term, executrix is the female term. So this is a person who has been named within the will as the one to distribute or manage the estate of the deceased. So that person will be named specifically within the body of the will. Then we move on to the administrator, administratrix. The same dichotomy applies. Administrator is the male, administratrix is a female. So with this term, it refers to a person who died intestate. Okay, so the administrator or the administratrix is a person who has been granted that authority by a court through what we call the letters of administration, okay, to manage or distribute the deceased person's estate. Then the last thing we have here is the beneficiary. So a beneficiary is a person for whom a provision has been made within a will. So I'll be using the term provision or disposition as I move along, but it basically refers to the same thing, that within the body of a will, some provision or some disposition has been made for a particular person. Now, we ask ourselves, who can make a will? Okay. Now, a person who has the power or ability to make a will is someone who is 18 years. Okay, 18 years, and must be of sound mind. So in reality, these are the two requirements. Once you're 18 years and you're of sound mind, you can make a will. Okay, there are some exceptions. For example, with members of the armed forces, they by the nature of their jobs, death is one of the probable events that may happen once they are on active duty. So once they have an intake or an officer is commissioned who is less than 18 years old, let's say 16, 17, okay, that person can make what we refer to as an armed forces will. And that is actually recognized under the Act 360. So if you say a person must be of sound mind, it means that the person must not be laboring under any, illness, okay, which would impair or affect his reasoning, so that he would not be able to understand or comprehend the nature of what he's doing. Because, to make a will, it's quite serious business. So it should not be something which should be done lightly. That is how come that requirement is there, because upon your death, your assets will be transferred to whoever has been named within the will for its management or distribution. So the testator, must be able to comprehend or understand what he's doing in order for the will to be valid. So as you are seeing on your screen, the testator must be aware he's making a will. So it's not someone who is feeling sleepy or someone who is under the influence of drugs or anything of that sort. He must be clear in his mind as to what he's doing. And also, the testator must have the property or the properties in this instance and the beneficiaries he wants to dispose of the properties of to whilst he's making the will. So you can't make the will, it will come to that, how to, alter a will. So you can't make the will and then say that I'll dispose of it at a later date. To know that disposition must be made as at the time you're making the will, or else, as we will see later on, you can revoke or alter the will as you so desire. Now, the testator must also be the person to determine how the assets should be distributed. So it shouldn't be the situation where someone is telling you how to go about it, because that's how come we use the term will. It is of your own free will. That is your last will and testament. Something that once you leave the shores of this earth, you know that it's something that you've left, the legacy that you've left for those who you've left behind. So it shouldn't be something that must be dictated to you. You should actually dictate it to whoever is drafting the will or whoever is preparing it on your behalf. And then again, the person must not be insane or having delusions or acting in an abnormal behavior or in any strange manner. The person must be lucid, clear in his mind as to what he or she is doing. Now, someone will say then that kind of excludes people who may suffer from, some mental episodes. So the law is quite clear on this one as well, that a mentally ill person can't make a will, except that at the point of he or she making the will, that in that period, he or she must be clear in his mind. So we call that the lucid period, LUCID. So during that lucid period where, for instance, he has probably taken some medication and he's quite all right, in that instance, that person can make a will. Okay, there was this one case where I read where was a very rich man, and he just started riding horses within his house everywhere he goes. And he had a lot of assets. So it's such a person, how is that going to be done? But at a moment when he was lucid, he was able to make the will before he died. That will was challenged on issues of validity, but it was held that once he made it whilst he was lucid, during the lucid period, then that will was valid. He was of sound mind at the time he did that. Okay, so let's discuss what can be the subject matter of a will. Okay, what can be the subject matter of a will? So you have things such as movable property. And movable property, it encompasses a wide range of things. Household items and appliances. You have clothes, your books, livestock, electronic gadgets, vehicles, machinery, etc. So many things. Once it is not fixed, okay, to the ground, we construe that as movable property. And someone will ask, why livestock? Yes, livestock because you can have someone who owns a ranch or who owns a large number of sheep or cattle or whatever animals there are. They are also property. So you can actually dispose of those within your will. Cash, investments, you have equity, financial securities, etc. Intellectual property. So gradually we are moving into the digital age, and you realize that you would actually have property or property ownership moving into the digital realm as well. So people who have copyright, patents, design rights, they can actually dispose of these things within their will, because these are rights which accrue to the person, which he owns, and can actually form part of his estate. Then, of course, immovable property, sorry. So immovable property, real estate. Okay, that's the most obvious one that we have. So these are the things which can form the subject matter of a will. You cannot will people. Okay, it doesn't fall within that category. So it's quite close in that regard. Okay, then we move on to okay. So in order to, and this is the practical aspect, in order to be sure of the disposition that you are making, it's always best to draw up a schedule of your assets. Okay, because you may have instances where someone has quite a number of assets and may inadvertently leave one out and have the issues crop up later after his death. So it's best to draw up a schedule of assets and then a list of who you want each asset to go to, so that you are clear in your mind as to how the assets are going to be managed or disposed of. Now, another issue that crops up is, do you really own that which you are disposing of? Okay, so for example, someone may own a property jointly with another who may not be a family member at all. Okay, when you come to the legal sense of it, that person is an owner of the house, but he's not the absolute owner. He's owner in part. But you realize that that portion of his estate, that portion of the asset, can form part of his estate upon his demise. So in making a will, once you are aware that that particular asset is not wholly yours, then the percentage in which you hold that asset or you own that asset should be clearly spelled out and disposed of in the will. So you can't say that the house should go to, let's say, my son entirely, because that entire asset does not belong to one person. It belongs to two people. So the portion of your interest is what would pass on to your estate and not the entire thing. Another thing we need to take note of is that a will always has, or a valid or a very tightly knit will would have what we call a residuary clause. Okay. Now, a residuary clause, as the name suggests, indicates that after everything has been distributed, in the event there is something which, or there's an asset which did not fall, within the schedule that you have, drawn up and distributed, then that asset should pass on to someone who we call the residuary legatee. So he is the person or the entity, okay, or the organization who you say that should I die possessed of any other asset, then it should go to this person as a means of saving it. The importance of this clause is that it prevents that portion of your estate from being distributed as an intestate. Because once you have not made a provision for it, the executors named within the will cannot go ahead and administrate it, or administer it. So it means that every asset which you intend to be distributed must be captured within the will, else either it goes under the residuary clause to the residuary legatee, or it forms part of your estate, so it becomes an intestate, okay, with regards to that particular asset alone. Now, a beneficiary who dies before the testator, okay, would ordinarily lose his, the entitlement to that particular asset, meaning that that particular asset would then go back to the deceased estate or the testator's estate. And should he not change the will or alter the will to reflect that that particular beneficiary is no more, then that asset would form part of the residuary legatee's entitlement. So it will go into residuary. Now, this position would hold unless that particular beneficiary has an issue, what we call a child or a descendant. If that particular beneficiary has a descendant, then upon the testator's death, that disposition to the deceased beneficiary would then move on to his descendant or his child. But if the person dies without a child, then that estate, that portion of the estate would either go to the residuary legatee, or if there's no residuary clause, it would actually move to form part of an intestate, portion of his estate. So now let's talk about what makes a will valid. Now that we've dealt with the subject matter, what can form part of a will, and then the requirements that for the testator to be able to dispose of the will, what makes it valid? Okay. Now these are technical issues which ordinarily one may gloss over. Okay. That is how come it's recommended that once you are putting up or drawing up a will, it is done by a legal professional, because we will know how to navigate around some of these, technicalities and be able to make a valid disposition of your will. Else, all your effort will be in vain. The will will become void, because the requirements have been clearly laid out under Act 360. So there are two grounds on which a will can be made invalid or be void. Two. One is in terms of the form. The other is in terms of the substance. So you have the form and then the substance. The form refers to the manner in which the will is supposed to make, the form in which it's supposed to take. And then the substance refers to the content, what's supposed to be in there, okay, and how it affects the validity of the will. Now, before I proceed to that, we need to take note of Section 1.3 of the Wills Act, Act 360, which states that a will or a provision in it is void once it was procured by fraud, duress, or undue influence. That's how come at the beginning I was stressing on the fact that as a testator, you must make it of your own free will. Because once someone is able to prove that you executed a will, by means of fraud, or you executed it under duress. Duress means that there's someone who's, coercing you to make the will, or undue influence. Okay, maybe that by your relationship with the person uses that emotional attachment to cajole you into making the will. Once these things are able to be proven, the will becomes void. That is how come it's critical to pay attention to the requirements that make a will valid, so that at the end of the day, that disposition will not be, overruled. Now, sections 2 and 3 of the Wills Act provide the formal requirements for the drafting of a will. The first is that it must be in writing, so you cannot just speak a will. Okay. Yes, there are instances where an oral will can be made, someone still, in the local terms. But when you want to comply with the Wills Act, it must be in writing for it to recognize under law. And it can be in any language. So it can be in your local dialect, okay? It must be handwritten. It can be typed, printed, however you want it. There's actually an instance, a case where the testator was able to, scrawl his will with a piece of charcoal on a wall. So the people were able to break down that piece of wall, and that became his will because it complied with the requirements. So it must be in writing. And whichever method is used must be consistent. So you can't start typing the will, decide you are tired, and then you start writing with a piece of pencil or a pen. It must be consistent. If it's written, it's written. If it's typed, it's typed. If it's scrawled, however you want it to be, that is how it should be done. Now, the second requirement is that the will must be signed by the testator, or in cases of incapacity or disability, the testator can actually, authorize someone else to sign under his direction on his behalf. Okay. Now, the signature here, it could be the testator's signature, as we all know it. You could use his initials, a thumbprint, or even any mark which can be attributable to that particular testator. It will suffice as a signature. Now, the signing of the will must be done in the presence of two witnesses, okay, who must be present at the same time. So it shouldn't be the instance where one person witnesses the testator sign, then the other comes later on, and okay, this is my signature. No, both of you must be present at the same time to witness the testator signing. Now, in the event where that is not possible, then the testator must acknowledge his signature in the presence of the witnesses before they go ahead and do what? And witness the will. So you can actually sign the will in the absence of your witnesses. However, both witnesses must be present at the same time when you, the testator, acknowledge that this is my signature, which I made without undue duress, without undue influence, of my own free will. Then it becomes valid. Excuse me. Now, you ask yourself, where can this signature, or where should this signature be executed? It should be done right underneath the last line of the will. Right underneath, because anything that comes after the signature is void. It will not be taken into account. So any disposition which you intend to make must be done within the body of the will, and right at the end, the testator's signature must be placed there. Now, in our side of the world, we recognize that not everyone would be literate. And when I say literate, I mean literate in terms of formal literacy, having exposure to the English language by virtue of education, background, or whatever it is. So an illiterate person is not precluded from making a will. He or she can make the will. However, there is something we call a jurat. So a jurat is a clause which a legal professional, a legal practitioner will put in there to explain to whoever is reading the will that the contents of the will have been read and explained to the person, that's the illiterate, in the language he or she understands. And that understanding has been communicated to the person making that explanation. So in that sense, that safeguards the illiterate person, okay, to comply, because necessarily once it's in writing and you have to comply the requirements, then you have to be literate in order to make it. But this is a provision that the law made in order for illiterate person, I use that word advisedly, illiterate persons to be able to also make a disposition under a will, subject to their being the jurat. Now, the witnesses also do not need to be literate. All they need to do is to be able to witness the signing of the will, or to be able to acknowledge the testator's signature in his own presence, right? they don't need to be literate, and they also don't need to know the contents of the will. If I would come to that, aspect later on in our discussion. Now, a blind person cannot make a will, cannot attest to a will. A blind person. So anybody at all, anyone at all can be a witness to a will, but a blind person cannot do so. The reason being that the act of witnessing requires your natural faculties to be able to do so. So the person must be able to attest that I saw Mr. Nkrumah append his signature to the document. Then it becomes valid. So that is the essence of witnessing. Now, a beneficiary cannot witness the will as well. The reason being that once you are taken to benefit under the will, you must not know beforehand what is in the content or what forms the content of the will. You may know it probably by word of mouth that, oh, in my will, I've done this for you. That is a testator telling you. But in terms of the formal requirements, with your name appearing on the document itself, that shouldn't be done, because the act is very clear that a beneficiary who witnesses a will would have that disposition or provision made to him becoming what? Void. So when it becomes void, it goes into intestacy, or it goes to form part of the residuary clause. So a beneficiary at all costs must not witness the will. In case he or she witnesses the will, then he or she is witnessing as a surplus witness, meaning that the two witnesses have already been procured. Then he or she comes on as an additional. But once he or she forms part of the principal two witnesses, then that disposition that is made to that particular beneficiary becomes void. So for the beneficiary, it's quite clear. Just you may know of it by word of mouth, but in terms of the formal requirements, again, your name should not even be appearing within the document. Else it will be construed as you exercising some form of duress or undue influence over the person making the will. That is how come on that basis, that disposition will become void. Now, an executor is any person, or can be any person 21 years and above. Now, 21 years is significant because under Ghanaian law, that is the age at which one can enter into a valid contract, at the age of 21. So an executor is a person 21 years and above and appointed by the testator in his will to see to the implementation of his wishes after his or her death. So an executor can actually witness a will. That is valid, equally valid. Okay, even though I would advise that that is not ideal, he or she can witness the will. But take note, an executor who is also a beneficiary cannot witness the will. Else, since it's a beneficiary, then that disposition or provision which is made to that executor becomes void and will go and form part of the testator's residuary or his the intestate portion of his estate. Now, the second aspect of validity, which is the substance, the content. So we are talking about the substance, what is in the will itself, what makes it valid. Okay. Now, the testator, like I said earlier, must be seen and aware at the time of making the will. And he must also approve of the content of the will and its execution. So again, it's not something which is done on your behalf. Okay, on your behalf means that probably you say, oh, okay, Kojo Mensah, these are my assets. I'm giving it to you to distribute it on my behalf and make the will. No, it is something that you, the testator yourself, must have done of your own free will and with your approval. Okay, and again, a disposition made to a beneficiary who is a witness is void. All right. So that really is all about the validity of the will in terms of substance. Now, so one will ask, with all these, strictures in terms of the execution of a will, can one alter the will or revoke it? Okay. Yes, the answer is yes to both questions. You can alter a will, you can revoke a will. Okay. Now, alteration would only be recognized if it's done in a proper manner, which is also provided under the Act. Okay. So there are two main ways of altering the will. One is by executing what we call a codicil. So a codicil is a separate document which is, executed in a similar manner to the will, okay? And it will later on be attached to the main will itself as a way of altering the contents of the will. That's the first way. The second method is by re-executing the will, meaning that you just redo it all together, okay? And by redoing it, in essence, you will come down to the next aspect of the discussion, which is the revocation of a will, to revoke it. Now, a will can be revoked in whole or in part. Okay, so the entire thing can be revoked, or a portion of it can be revoked. And both of these things must be done during the lifetime of the testator. So this is not something which is done after the testator is dead and gone. No, it's done by the testator himself during his lifetime. Now, revocation can be done in a number of ways, okay? The first method is the most obvious, destroying it. So it can be bent, torn apart. I mean, physical destruction. Once it's done by the testator himself or any other person in the testator's presence. So this is not something which, will be done or, delegated to be done by someone else. So it must be done in the testator's presence by the person who he has authorized to do so. The second manner of revoking a will is by executing what we call a written declaration. Okay, expressing the intention to revoke. And this is done in the same manner as a will is executed. Okay, so I think I'll pause here whilst our technical team try and do a few adjustments. So kindly hold on.
Yes, and thank you very, very much. Like I said, I don't want to even cough. I hope that we are going to get this recorded so that it becomes a very important document we can always refer to. As he kept speaking, he was mentioning the word void, become void, and these are things that we need to take particular notice of, because it is not if it is not your intention to die intestate, but because of one or two things, you are deemed to have died tested, I think that it would be very unfortunate, and we ourselves wouldn't have done ourselves and our families any favor at all. So when he's speaking, when he mentions the act of something being void, please let us be very particular and take notice of those issues. Lawyer would continue.
Okay, thank you, Odabuchi. Now, we are continuing with the ways and means by which one can revoke the will. The first two have been canvassed already. First being physical destruction, okay, burning, shredding, etc. And then the second is by executing a written declaration, which is done in the same manner as, executing a will, meaning that the testator himself would execute a written declaration, and it will be signed by two witnesses in his presence. So it should be executed in the same manner as the will is done. Now, the other methods are that you may execute another will which expressly revokes a previous one. So usually with the drafting of a will, when we are constructing a will, the first line almost reads that this is the last will and testament of so and so, and this shall be my last will and testament, and any other will executed before this date, so it stands hereby as revoked. It's so that it's clear that no other will take precedence over the one which is being executed. Okay. So by executing another will to expressly revoke the old one is another means of revoking the will. Or you simply execute a new will which has inconsistent provisions with the older one. So this is what we call a battle of the forms. So you have one will which is older than the other. Once the newer will is inconsistent with the older one, then the newer one is taken or interpreted to have revoked the older one. Now, so what happens if I change my mind? I've revoked the will, but I changed my mind that, oh, you know what? Upon second thought, the dispositions I made under the old will, I would like for it to be done. That can also be achieved. So you can revive a revoked will. And then the ways by which you can revive are two. You can re-execute a fresh will, okay, which has the same, content or the same dispositions as the older one had, or the one that was revoked had. Or you can execute a written declaration in the same manner as you execute a will, okay, showing that intention to revive the old will. So these are the two means by which a revoked will can be revived. You are reviving it, bringing it back to life. Now, once a will is executed, it must be deposited at the registry of the High Court. Now, people say, oh, but I want to hold it to my chest. I'm keeping it in my safe. That is all well and fine. But you see, for practical reasons and for reasons of authenticity and validity, that is how come it is required for the testator to deposit a copy of the will at the High Court registry. So you can keep a copy, okay, at all costs. Why not? You can keep a copy. However, one copy must definitely be deposited at the High Court. And like I said, it's for validity and authenticity purposes to avoid the kinds of conflicts which occur, after the death of an individual. Now, once a copy has been given to another person, so some individuals also prefer to keep a copy with their personal lawyers or personal counsel. So once that is done, that person or whoever it is, it may be your relative, a brother, a sister, a parent, a child, whoever it is, whoever has that copy of the will, upon notice of the death of the testator, you have 14 days to go and deposit the copy you have with the High Court. So once you have that in your custody and you are aware that the person is dead, within 14 days, you must go and deposit it at the High Court. Okay. Now, so what happens after the death of the testator? Okay. So usually we have what we call the reading of the will. Okay. The reading of the will. Someone will ask, can a reading be done before? Well, yes, it can be done. Because you have instances where certain testators actually, specify how their funeral is to be conducted. So before they are dead, they leave express instructions that this is how I want my funeral to be organized. I want to be buried in 2 weeks. Okay, this is the account number where I've saved money for my funeral expenses. There are people who actually go that extra length to do so. They are that organized. So they've given, in fact, there was one where when I was being taught, the lecturer gave the example of actually having drafted a will where even the hymn numbers and the scripture readings are specified by the testator. That this is the hymn, this hymn should be sung after this particular part, at this particular portion of the service, and so on. The person was that detailed. So yes, the will can be read before the funeral or after the funeral, whichever the case may be. So once it is read, then the executors, being the people who have been named within the will to execute or manage the estate, would go ahead to apply for what we call probate. Okay, so you apply for probate at the High Court or the Circuit Court. Okay. Now, probate is the authorization given to manage or distribute the estate of the deceased. Now, the distribution is always done in accordance with the will. So you as the executor, you are not clothed with discretion. Okay, that, oh, in my discretion, Kojo Mensah didn't get enough, so let me give a little bit more to Kojo Mensah. That is not your decision to make. That decision has already been made by the testator, and yours is to follow suit. Now, intestacy. So intestacy is the other aspect where one dies without a will, like I indicated earlier. So what happens when one dies intestate? Or like I was explaining earlier, in the instance where a provision or an asset under the will falls into intestacy, or an asset which hasn't been named at all within the will it goes into intestacy. Okay, so what happens in that instance? So that process is managed under the Interstate Succession Law, or what we now know as the Interstate Succession Act, 1985, PNDC Law 111. Okay, now this actually specifies who is qualified, okay, to take charge of the estate of the deceased. Because take note, once the person dies intestate, you lose the ability to control how your assets are going to be managed or distributed. You lose it because now the administrator is clothed with the discretion to manage it on your behalf. So whether your favorite son or your favorite daughter or whoever it is would get, the estate, or the person who helped you, let's say, for example, there are certain provisions which are made to people who are not family members, but they may have played a particular role in that person's life, for which reason the person would have ordinarily wanted that person to benefit under the will. Then you have the administrators not even knowing of that person, and that person gets left out. So you lose that control over the management or the distribution of your assets after your death. Now, the people or the individuals who are mandated or qualified to apply to the court for letters of administration are 4. And they have been listed in order of priority. So the Act recognizes that there's a hierarchy, there's a scale through which people need to go in order to qualify to apply for letters of administration. The first is the surviving spouse. Okay, the surviving spouse. The second are the surviving children. The third is the surviving parents. And then the fourth is the customary successor. Okay. So these are the 4 individuals or people who qualify to apply for letters of administration. No one else. Your friend cannot apply on your behalf. You're simply speaking, your cousin, for example, because a cousin or uncle is not specified here. So either you are the spouse, you're a child, you're a parent, or you are what we call the customary successor to the deceased. Then you qualify for to apply for what we call letters of administration. Okay. Now, PNDC Law 111 has also specified how the estate is supposed to be administered. So the quantities and the shares in which the property is to be administered have been spelled out under law. So that is clear. So how much would go to the spouse, the children, the parents, and the family? So these are the 4 categories of people who can benefit under, the intestate disposition: the spouse, the surviving children, the parents, and then the family. And the Act has made provisions for instances where, let's say, 1 or 2 or more of them are not, are no more. So for example, if your parents are no more, then what happens to the portion that goes to your parents? The act has a particular, computation for all that, which should apply when the LA is taken, so the letters for administration are taken. Now, we need to take note of the fact that one cannot simply get up and manage the estate of a deceased person after the person's death. You need that formal authorization through the grant of a probate, meaning that the person left a will and you are an executor, or through the grant of letters of administration, thereby making you an administrator or an administratrix in order for you to manage the estate of the deceased. Because if you choose to go ahead and distribute the estate of the deceased without having any of these two documents, it amounts to a criminal offense. It's called intermeddling. So you are intermeddling with the estate of the deceased. And with intermeddling, it carries a jail term and a fine. You can actually have both. You can be slapped with a fine and a jail term. So it's be advised in these matters. Once a family member, a friend, or whoever passes on, you are not immediately clothed with the power to manage or distribute that person's estate. You need to go through the formal process. So either there's a will and you're an executor, or you fall within the category of people who are qualified to apply for letters of administration, and you go ahead to do so. So that brings an end to my presentation. Thank you all for your attention so far. So I think I'll give it to the moderator for questions. Hello?
Thank you very, very much. So, a very well delivered piece. I was wondering how he was going to do all that in such a time, but I think he has covered so much. But then now the ball is in our court. We have digested what he has said, and it is time for us to ask questions. I would like to recognize those online. I see Mami Joe all the way from Dubai. I have my brother-in-law Mahoney joining, and all of you, we are glad to have you on board, and God bless you. As you contemplate what questions it is that you want to ask, I would like to set the ball rolling, if that is fine, whilst we wait for your questions. Council, please, can two persons make a will? Now in our world, we do everything with our wives. They are like handbags, mini handbags to us. So I want to ask, can two persons make a will?
Okay. The answer is no, for the same reason as the fact that you came into this world alone. Okay, even twins cannot execute at the same will. And you see, this also highlights the issue I was drawing your attention to with respect to, for example, marital property. Because under the New Land Act, property acquired during the pendency of marriage belongs to both spouses per the New Land Act.
Yeah.
So in that instance, both husband and wife are owners of the same property.
Co-owners, okay.
Now, what happens where the woman makes a disposition to a different person and the man makes a disposition to another person? You realize that those people will then become separate co-owners of the same estate.
Yeah.
So two people cannot make, or cannot execute a will, a joint will. It must be separate.
Okay.
Okay. But the challenge is where the disposition is being made and the assets in question are co-owned. You have to be careful in the disposition and how you make it. That is the answer to that.
You have. Okay. So I think for the ladies who are thinking along that line, I think I have help. And Council, during your submission, you also mentioned that even livestock can be willed to a beneficiary. I want to find out. These things are easily sold. So if your daddy had 100 cattle and he willed it to you, but at the time of his death, because of COVID, he had sold about 80 of them. What do I do? Do I go to each person and take my cow back?
Okay, so that disposition, okay, has lapsed. We call it, the lapsing of a disposition, all right, which I think is covered under Section 8 of the Act. So once that disposition lapses, I mean, there's nothing much that can be done about it, because either the property is sold off, destroyed, or something else has happened to it entirely. It now is not available to be disposed of.
Okay.
So once it cannot be disposed of, it has lapsed.
Okay.
But that lapse would not affect the entire validity of the will. There may be other properties there which may be equally, be in existence and could be disposed of.
Okay.
But, for example, livestock. So that is how come you may not, list or number the livestock. So let's say, I give 100 cattle to Gojo, 200 to Ama, and so on and so forth, because you do not know what may happen in the near future. The livestock may expand or reduce. If it expands beyond the number you specified in the will, that remainder falls either into intestacy or goes to your residual legatee. Okay. Now, I mean, so it's best to leave some of those things. Best to leave the quantification open. Okay. So the livestock should go to, or the livestock should be shared equally between so and so, or the livestock should be split in 3 parts and shared between, the beneficiary, the named beneficiaries. Okay. It need not be just livestock. It also could be property. Okay. Because there's actually an instance that I'm working with now, where a father had 18 children.
How many?
18.
18, 1-8. Okay.
18 children, and he built a mansion with 8 rooms.
Okay.
Now, how we share the rooms has become a problem because he said the rooms should be shared equally among all my children.
Wow.
That is the will of the testator. And per law, you are supposed to follow what the testator's will says. So if you assign a particular room to 2 siblings who have a quarrel, you are going to have issues. So the distribution then becomes, a challenge. But like I said, that, distribution scheme can apply to any of their assets, apart from, let's say, a car, But with immoral property, livestock, clothes, clothes go specifically to people. So that scheme would not work.
Okay. Okay. I see Brother Adote's hand. Is there a microphone here, or would he have to come up? Brother Adote, please come up.
Thank you. You really done well with the explanation.
Please come forward.
Okay.
I want to capture it.
I want to ask if there's a ratio for sharing properties. If I'm doing a will, is there a specified ratio that I can allot XYZ to XYZ children, or is purely at my discretion? Secondly, which of the marriages are more problematic for you as a legal practitioner? Which of the marriages has more problems in sharing wills? For example, if the person is polygamous, do they tend to have more problems with doing wills, or if the person has 1 wife?
Well, the second one, I wanted to step in, but I think first order won't allow me. So,
okay. So, with regards to the first question, no, there's no requirement imposed on you to distribute your assets in accordance with a particular ratio. Okay. The only law which mandates a particular ratio, or the distribution of an estate in accordance with a particular ratio, is the PLDC law 111. Okay. Like I said, that law has stated clearly which portion of the estate should go to which person. And like I said, there are 4 people. You have the spouse, the child, the surviving parents, and the family. Okay, so the PNDC law 111 has actually spelled out the ratio, but with the will, I mean, like I said, it is the free will of the testator. Okay, so there's no requirement with regards to distribution in terms of ratio. And with the second question, yes, it's a good question because it's something which usually crops up. Now, you know, with the customary marriages, okay, what they say is that they are potentially polygamous, meaning that once you acquire a marriage or prepare a marriage under customary law, you can't actually go ahead and marry more spouses. Okay. Now, once that is done, those spouses are actually recognized as your spouse.
Okay.
Under law. So when you have an issue such as you dying intestate, that is where the issues pop up. Because the law has stated what percentage or what share of the property should go to the spouse. And once they are recognized in law as a spouse, they are entitled to that portion as well.
Okay.
Okay. So that is where that comes up. But where it is the traditional, the monogamous marriage, what we call the Christian marriage, okay, that is monogamous. You have only one spouse. All right. Any other person is still recognized in law to be your spouse. So there shouldn't be an issue there. The only issue is what I think drew your attention to earlier, where a particular asset is actually co-owned by the spouses. So you need to be careful as to how that is distributed. Else, that disposition will lapse into intestacy or would go to the residuary legatee. And a funny comment is that usually people say that as a residuary legatee is someone who at the in fact you did not even dream of the person benefiting.
Yeah.
But sometimes because of the pitfalls in the execution of the will, that person actually ends up getting more properties to himself.
Yeah.
Because most of the dispositions in the properties will be held to be void and will lapse to the residuary, who they will then benefit. So that is the answer to that one.
Well, thank you, lawyer. There's a question online I would want to take. It's from our sister Anita Mills. And she's asking, how long should it take before a lawyer comes forward after a person dies testate?
Okay. So like the law requires, once you have a copy of the will with you, you have 14 days, okay, to deposit the will at the High Court. Okay. Right. Usually, people would also notify their counsel that upon my death, these are the sequence of events which must be triggered. Okay. So I partook of a reading of a will recently, where my boss was the one who was the counsel for the deceased. And the one had quite, a sizable estate. So he told him that, you know what, I have 2 wives. This is how things should go upon my death. So as soon as he heard of his demise, that sequence of events was triggered. A family meeting was convened. They were informed of the wishes of the testator. We organized for the will to be read. Okay. Now the executors were identified clearly with the ID cards and everything. And the process has started for the grant of probate. Okay. So you'd want to get that additional thing done if you lodge a copy with your counsel that upon my demise, this is how I want things to go. Okay. And then he or she will be bound by it to effect it. Okay.
Okay. I think that's important because of this thing about a year after the death. So I think that's important. I see first Elder has a mic. So Elder, please, your question.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. My question is this. If you make certain investments or even bank accounts opening and so on, they normally would ask you to state your next of kin. How does that fit within the framework of a will? And then secondly, if you were to die interstate, for instance, how again does that fit into the framework of administering your estate?
So I believe for that, the notification of the next of kin is upon your death. Okay, probably the person who can be notified that this individual has an account with the bank. Okay, so that after the person is notified, whoever is actually mandated under law, so meaning that that person would have either the probate or the LA can then come forward and administer the estate. So with most banks, you realize that unless the executor, okay, or the administrator or administratrix brings forward the probate or the letters for administration, the contents of the account are not even disclosed to him. How much is even in the account, or even access to the account is not even granted to the person. So for the notification of next of kin, I think it's just for notification purposes, as it says, to notify the person that the deceased had, an account with the bank. But anybody who wishes to administer the estate or to access the account of the deceased after, the account of the deceased must either bring the probate or the LA, else you will not have access to it.
Yeah. Elder, I think there were two questions. They've been answered. Okay. Yes, Joe. But before Joe comes up, I would want to find out, in connection to Elder's question, what of insurance? I have indicated that so and so should go to my wife, but I went to sleep and I had second thoughts. So I said my son, in my will, I said my son should rather be the one benefiting or the beneficiary. So tied to Elder's question about the next of kin, what if the insurer and then the lawyer, the document the lawyer has, do not agree in terms of who the beneficiary is with respect to the same assets?
Okay, so I think usually there's always that there's always that challenge. Okay, that is how come we advise that should there be any change, in as much as possible, the alteration or the revocation of the will should be done to reflect whatever changes is in there, because the beneficiary of the policy is clear. It's on the face of it.
Yeah.
But if in the disposition of his estate, the testator actually grants it to another person, that becomes an issue. Okay. So that conflict, or usually there's some form of amicable way in which that is.
But which takes precedent over the other?
Of course, the will should.
Okay.
But with regards to these policies, they also guard it jealously.
Yeah.
This is what the person actually, or this is who the person actually says should benefit in the event of his or her demise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joe, please.
Hello. All right. Thank you, Elder. Before I ask my question, I received a question from one of our participants, Effa Boatma, and her question is: you mentioned that a blind person cannot be a witness to a will. What of if the person is vision impaired? Can he make a will?
Can he make a will?
Can he make a will? He cannot serve as a witness to a will, but can he make a will?
Yes, the person can.
He can make a will.
Yes, the person can.
Though he's blind.
Yes, the person can.
Okay, meaning that those who will be his witnesses should be.
Yes. Because, like I said, the act of witnessing requires your natural faculties, which is your sight, especially, to actually see the person. Okay. So there's actually there was one case where we treated in school where the testator was confined to a room.
Yeah.
He had a communicable disease. So he was confined to a room. So when he realized he was about to die, in making the will, he allowed them to punch a hole in the wall. So the witnesses actually stood and witnessed him through the hole, executing the will. He died before they even, went ahead to execute it. But it was held that once they witnessed it, So it was just to drive home the fact that the act of witnessing the will is at the signature or the sign of the will is what is important. That's how come that the requirement is there for the person to be, cited.
So for the blind man, would there be the requirement of a jurat in the will?
Precisely. So that's how come, yes. So for a blind person, you would actually have to have a jurat within the will to explain, for someone to explain to him that this is what's written and for him to execute it. So he can make a will, but he cannot witness it.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe.
All right, Elder. I have several of them, but maybe let me start with two. The first, I don't know whether you mentioned it because I stepped out. My first question is, can we have a verbal will? A verbal will in the presence of the lawyer without putting it into writing? Can that be enforced?
Okay. We have what we call summon seal. Okay. And that is usually done at the cusp of death. So there's someone on his dying bed who, makes that oral declaration. Right. So that is recognized, but it's not recognized under let's say the formal requirements of a will, so that the person can be an executor. No. Because to be an executor, you need to be named within the written document.
Yeah.
All right. So it's still as if the person is intestate. Just that whoever goes ahead to get the LA is bound by the last wishes of the testator because the person will have complied with the requirements of the summons seal. Okay. Meaning that the declaration must be done on his deathbed and in the presence of certain, named witnesses for it to be valid.
Yeah. So, Counsel, my understanding from what you are saying is that it is not possible under Act 360 under the will to have an unwritten will.
No.
Okay.
Because the requirements are clear under under sections 2 that they must be in writing. So once it should be in writing, any other thing is not recognized under the Wills Act.
Thank you. Joe, would you?
Just the last one, then I'll go on. Yes. You mentioned that the will should be deposited at the registry of the High Court. Does it render it void if it's not done?
Sorry.
If you don't deposit it at the registry, does it render the will void?
No, it doesn't. But like I said, because of issues regarding, family conflict and all these things, that is how come it's required to deposit a copy at the registry of the High Court. You can have a copy yourself. You can have a copy given to, any other person you so choose, but at least one copy should be with a registry of the High Court. And that is the one which we read upon the death of the testator. So we realize that when we apply for a will to be read, okay, a search is done, a search is conducted at the registry of the High Court, then the will is procured. So usually when it's deposited at the registry of the High Court, it is sealed. Okay. So the sealing is done with red wax. Okay, so it's marked across all the edges to show that it is unbroken. So it's upon the death of the testator that the seal is broken, and then the will is extracted. So whatever is read at the court is held to be the authenticated or validated copy.
Okay. This is important because Sister Anita Mills has a follow-up question, and she was asking, in the absence of a lawyer, which will is regarded as valid and should be read?
In the absence of
a lawyer, which will is regarded as valid and should be read? So I think this very submission you made, I think goes to answer, unless you have anything to add.
Just maybe a tiny, addition that anybody can. Okay. Once it conforms with the requirements of Act 360, you can. Just that because of some of these technicalities involved, it is advisable that you have a legal professional or practitioner draft it for you, so that you avoid the situation where most of your dispositions will lapse, go into intestacy, or would go to the residuary legatee. So that's the only addition I think on.
Thank you. Uncle Moses, please. Kofi will be next.
I wanted to know if somebody dies and the person didn't do any will, and we can't find any document indicating where or whether he has made this in a will or to trace his entitlements. Where can we go to trace all these things?
Okay, so that is how come it's always vital to deposit a copy at the registry of the High Court, so that upon the death of the person, okay, a search, we conduct what we call a search at the registry of the High Court to ascertain whether that person, deposited a copy of his will there, right? And the search, you must make sure that the name within the search corresponds with the name the person used when he's depositing the will, because that is, a common challenge that usually crops up, where let's say the person goes by the name of Prince Kofi Amwa.
Yeah.
Okay, in real life. But when he was executing the will, and when he deposited it under the name of Amwa Prince. When you conduct a search with the name Prince Kofi Amwa, it will come out as blank. So that is always a challenge where you try and tell our clients or those for whom we execute the will that the particular name you use is the name you should inform, with which you should inform whoever has a copy, or whoever or your beneficiaries that are made a will, are deposited at the court. This is the particular name that I used, so that the beneficiaries don't go, beating around the bush in the event that they don't have a copy. So, because we have instances where that's happened. A friend for whom I applied, I conducted a search for his grandfather's estate. We conducted a search about 6 times under different names. So that's the name Prince Kofi Amwa Prince, until one of them popped up, which actually turned out to be this. Yes. So that's always a challenge. The particular name must be there, but the registry of the High Court is the first place you should go to conduct a search, see whether the person left a will.
Thank you. Kofi. Oh, okay. There are 2 Kofis. Okay, so the 2 Kofis, and then you.
All right. My question is, if I make a will, let's say in 2010, and then there's an amendment in 2011, but then unfortunately I pass on before the second will is sent to the court, which one will be read? Will it be the first, or it will be the amended one?
All right. So you see, with that instance, the second will, once it is properly drafted, okay, properly drafted. And when I say properly, it means that it has conformed with all the requirements in writing, witness, it's gone through all of that. And that within the body of that will, it is expressed to have revoked the earlier one. All right. Then the second one is the current one, which must be read. So that conflict would happen where either no one is aware of the fact that you've executed the second will to revoke the other one, okay, and then you've not also deposited a copy at the registry of the High Court, informing them that there's an older one there you want to withdraw, right? Then that challenge occurs, and usually that is what leads to some of these conflicts later on after the death of the person, because a family member will come and say that, hey, but he gave me a copy of his will. How come there's an older copy there, but it's a newer copy that it should be the one that will be read? Then becomes a whole issue. So you just try and avoid some of these things, that immediately you execute a second will, revoking the older one immediately, as much as possible, have it deposited at the registry of the High Court and revoke the older one.
Please, my question is that whereby the person property transfers the property to the name of another person, maybe for a certain reason, and then the person, the original owner, we can that person owes the property referring to work since there's no will for the person.
Is it clear now?
Yeah, it's clear. So, you know, when we were talking about estate planning, and I was mentioning the various components, the various things that can happen under kind of an estate with the insurance policies, the wills. I mentioned the declaration of a trust. Okay, so that is a kind of situation where you know the kind of situation you envisage within your question, where I own the property, but it is another person whose name is on it. Okay, that creates, unless you have expressly assigned your interest, okay, or your ownership outrightly to that person, okay, then that person is, you know, is held to be holding the property on trust for you. So you have instances such as that where, like I said, parents, spouses declare trusts, okay, whereby they hold properties in their name, but in reality, it's for the sole benefit of their spouse or their children. All right. Now, it is important that once you know of this, or the testator is aware of the existence of such a trust, the trust is actually, you know, administered within the will. All right. Because if the beneficiaries are not aware of their beneficial ownership of that particular asset, then the person whose name is on the property, being the trustee, is what we call the legal owner.
Yeah.
And as a legal owner, he may do with it as he pleases.
Yeah.
All right. So as a testator, if you are aware of such a trust existing, you must actually specify it within the will. So, for example, I've come across the instance where a testator actually created a trust within the will for the education of his grandchildren.
Okay.
So, in natural fact, he had actually set up a particular account tied to a particular commercial property. So that commercial property was you know, accruing rent.
Yeah.
The rent proceeds were paid into that account, and he had declared a trust within the will over that account, that he's appointing his, you know, eldest son as a trustee of that account.
Okay.
And that account must be used solely for the education of the grandchildren. So all the school fees of the grandchildren were covered. That next generation were covered because of the institution of that particular trust. So that must be clear within the body of the will.
Okay.
Okay. Else the person, the legal owner, takes absolute benefit of it.
Okay. So what I understand is that in the absence of such a trust, the beneficial owner stands to lose out to the legal.
Yes, if the beneficial owner is not aware of it. And you see, that's how come we also advise that when you are creating a trust can be created. I mean, it may not especially be in writing.
Yeah.
It can be created, I mean, orally. However, we advise that you come for the professional to execute the trust deed.
Okay.
Okay, so that it is clear and for all to see that whoever is holding that property is holding it on trust for some people.
Okay.
Right. Else, like I said, the legal owner is the one who takes, you know, the absolute benefit of it.
Thank you. Kofi?
My question has to do with the emergence of technology. Now we have OneDrive, Google Drive, iCloud, WhatsApp, and all of these. So, what is the validity of a digitally stored will? Is it applicable in court scenarios, or it's null and void? That's my question.
It's a good question. Yeah. Coming from the next generation, he's thinking, he's thinking ahead. It's a good question. Under the Wills Act, unfortunately, there's no such provision for a digital, disposition. Okay, such that, for example, the person declares the will or executes the will, loads it onto his cloud, and it's there. There's no such provision unless that particular will has been executed in the proper manner and lodged. Okay, so currently all we have to go by is Act 360, which provides that the will should be in a prescribed format.
Yeah.
Okay, the substance which we are discussed must also be there, must also hold, and then it should be what? Lodged. Right? The lodging does not make it valid or invalid though, but like I said, it is a form of security to secure the authenticity and validity of the will.
Talk about lodgement. Our brother Kwekweni is not within the jurisdiction, but he is concerned about cost implications of for depositing your will at the High Court. He wants to know if there are any cost implications.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So Kweku, there are no cost implications to lodging that. Yeah, Adote.
Mine is incorrect. Hello? Okay.
Face the camera.
There are cost implications in doing a will. Even when it's read, per what I experienced when my grandmother went to read the will, there were some calculations, there were some funny calculations that were done, and at the end we had to pay. So the question is, what are the cost implications? How much am I supposed to pay in doing a will? And after the will has been read, what are the cost implications too? So this is one. Then, must I necessarily have properties to do a will?
Sorry.
Must I necessarily have properties to do a will? Then, the hidden cost that I spoke about. And can I include one's last wishes in the will as well? Last wishes. Is that one to add it to a will? Thank you.
Okay. This is quite a loaded one coming from Adoti. But yeah, very, very valid questions. Okay. So I'll tackle the cost one first. Yes, there are cost implications for one, reading the will. Okay. And secondly, for its administration. Now, usually, when you make the application for it to be read, I think there's a nominal fee that must be paid for the use of the facility. Okay, because it is one of the registrars of the court who would actually read it. And then, secondly, upon the grant of probate, okay, or letters of administration, the beneficiary or the estate must pay what we call estate tax. Okay, now estate tax is computed based on the quantum of assets within the estate. So you realize that where you have a lot of assets, okay, with in the estate, the more you pay, and that has actually been a challenge for people actually accessing their parents or their loved ones' estate because of that cost implication. Okay, because it's a computation based on all of the assets of the estate, and then it's a percentage of it. I don't want to commit myself, but I know it's around, if not 2%, or it's around 3%, or the value of the estate. So you can imagine if you have a 3 million Ghana cedi estate or more, how much you're going to pay. Yeah. Okay, so it's actually quite a challenge, but that is what the law prescribes. I'm not too clear on the actual percentage, but there's a percentage that you pay as estate tax. And that goes for whether it is early, whether it is probate, you will pay it. So whichever way you go. Now, I remember the second and third question. Adoti?
The key, what was the second?
Yeah, so property, it depends on the context in which you use property, because even your phone is property. Okay, so if it's property in terms of immovable property, I mean, you don't really need immovable property to make a will. Once you have assets. Assets, your clothes, appliances, all these things are assets. You can make a will. That is how come someone who is 18 years or more can make a will. Okay. Then your third question. Sorry. Yes. One can include his or her last wishes, within the body of the will, and that must be respected by the executor.
Yeah.
So there's actually one where it became actually contentious, where the testator left two properties or two immoral properties to his children, one of which he specified that it is his desire and wish for that to be used as a memorial to his late mother.
Okay.
And then the other one should go to their children. Okay, absolutely. Now, some of the children wanted the second property to also be used as a memorial to their father, and the other side disagreed and became contentious. So you realize that the wishes of the testator can be, encapsulated within the body of the will, and the executor is actually bound to give effect to it in the administration.
Yeah. And even as he says that, I would like to just chip in that the church advises that under the trust services that please give what you have to the church before you go, because don't put your generations in any war. Yeah, I have a house in Cantonment, sell it and give it to the church, and they realize that the value is more than the one at Carnation. So kindly do all those things for the church before you go. Joe.
Yes, Elder. This is from Frank Udro. He sent it to me. He wants to know whether the will should only be read at the law court or it can be read anywhere.
So ideally, again, for the avoidance of or the reduction of conflicts, that is where we request for it to be read. Okay. Because once you procure the copy, you can apply for the reading of the will to be done in court. But the family can also come to that, agreement that we want it to be read, at whichever location that they so desire. That will be respected. And exactly, it's usually required that the lawyer, okay, if he's alive, who drafted the will, be the one who would handle that process. Some actually mandate that their counsel should read at a particular point in time.
Okay. The second one is, can a jointly owned asset be included in a will?
Yes, it can, but like I said, that must be, carefully disposed of, because the jointly owned assets would have, it depends on the status of ownership, okay? Because if it happens that the ownership is what we call a joint ownership, right? In law, in law, you have two forms of co-ownership. You have joint ownership, and you have what we call tenancy in common. Okay. Now, under the joint ownership, it belongs to the two people jointly. There are no shares in the property to speak of. Okay. The property is owned jointly by the named owners, and then with the name owners, there's something we call the right of survivorship. Now, the right of survivorship says that whichever of the owners predeceases the other, then it means that the surviving owner takes the absolute benefit of that property. Okay, so in that instance, if you make a disposition of a jointly owned property, it is likely to lapse or become void because of the nature of ownership at play. But where the ownership is under what we call the tenancy in common arrangement, okay, then it means that the owners hold distinct shares in the property. So, for example, two brothers can be tenants in common over a particular piece of property. It means that once they are just two, the property is owned in what? In that share, 50-50. Okay. So that in that instance, then the person who owns that particular share in the property can dispose of his share in the will. But where it is jointly owned and the right of survivorship operates, then means that really, in reality, you can't dispose of it in your will. So you should also be careful how you jointly own property or co-ownership of property.
Yeah.
Because of the two ways by which you can construe ownership.
Thank you. We have two, those will be the last two. And then I will ask a final question, then we'll close. So, Brad and then Kofi would ask their questions, and I'll ask one final question to bring the program to an end.
Can you will your property to an animal? Because I've just seen an article online where a 50-year-old man in France willed half of his property to a dog. Secondly, can a will be disrespected? Can a will be disrespected? And what are the grounds for disrespecting a will?
Okay. Well, I don't know. I don't know how those instances happen where people outside the country actually, give property to their dogs and cats and whatever it is. But for me, when I rationalize about the whole thing, an animal cannot own property. Okay. So if an animal cannot own property and you make a disposition to an animal, how would the executor vest ownership in that animal? Then it means that that disposition becomes void. And when it becomes void, again, two things. It either falls into intestacy or it goes to the residuary legatee under the residuary clause. Okay. So it's highly, impossible for an animal to own property and thereby validly, become entitled to a property under a will. And then with regards to the second question, no. The will, that's how come it is said to be your last will and testament. It should be respected. Okay, because an executor who actually goes against the will, can actually suffer some consequences later on in law. So you are mandated to carry out the will of the testator as is captured within the document.
Okay.
Okay.
So how are wills then contested? If it has to be respected, why do people contest a will? And under what circumstances can you contest a will?
Okay. So usually with the contest of a will, it comes under so many ambits. Because people can contest the validity, okay, and say that because one or two requirements are not complied with, then the entire will is invalid and then it should lapse into intestacy. Some may also be disputing the content or disputing the fact that the testator even made that particular will at all. I mean, so many things crop out. There are so many dynamics as to why people contest the will. But usually, it does not really pertain to the administration, much more to how the will was, procured. That is how come people usually get up in arms about, dispositions under a will, especially where they feel slighted about certain dispositions. But again, if the executor decides to go ahead and execute a will contrary to its provisions, the beneficiaries can actually bring an action against him to compel him to execute it in accordance with the will, or have the grant of probate to him revoked entirely. So that once it's revoked, it lapses to intestacy. Then they appoint administrators to administer the estate.
Okay.
Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard of situations where people are contesting that the will is unfair. I mean, the distribution of the assets is unfair. And so how does that fit in?
Okay. So that will usually come up where it's under the letters of administration. Because under the letters of administration is the administrator who has their discretion to administer the assets of the deceased. But where there's a will which has specified what should go to whom, I mean, clearly there should be no contest about that, except, like I said, where certain people feel slighted in some way or form. But at the end of the day, almost always it is the will which is upheld, because that is how come no other document, no other addition, okay, is recognized when it comes to the will. So you can't hold a document except a validly executed codicil or written declaration saying that, well, he left out this one or decided to change it and this is it. Unless you bring any of those documents, then it is only those dispositions within what we call the four corners of the document, which should be respected. Anything else is not taken into consideration.
Kofi, before you come in, I would like to try my last question to this, because it relates. What if my dad, distributes and I didn't get anything? So this
under a will,
not under an intestacy. So this also, is tied into who can caveat. So if you can take the two.
Okay. So in fact, there has actually been a case, Humphrey Bonsu and another, where an imbecile, so an imbecile is someone who cannot think or act for himself, was not provided for, under his father's estate, and in the end, the court upheld the father's will. Because a child is entitled to a reasonable provision under the will. That much is clear. So a child who has not been reasonably provided for under the will or by the administrators can actually apply for reasonable provision to meet, for him or her. But usually it is where the child is underage, where that's when the courts will actually go ahead. That's one of the very few instances where the courts would, go beyond the status last will and make that provision for that particular child. Else, it is the will of the testator which will be upheld. Simplicity.
So in this particular case, what I get is that the individual did not fall under the age in contemplation, which is below 18.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was in fact, it's one of those cases where everybody who reads it feels a bit, why? But that is the thing about law. The principle is what the judges went with, and the principle is that once the person is of age, then you can't be talking about reasonable provision when you are expected to work for yourself. But what made this a very challenging case was that the person was an imbecile. He couldn't work, he couldn't think for himself, he couldn't do anything. So how do you expect him to work and fend for himself? But they went with the principle and decided not to make an exception in that instance.
So who can caveat?
Sorry.
Who can caveat?
Who can?
Caveat.
Caveat a rule. Okay. So caveats can be done precisely by anybody who has an interest in the estate of the deceased. Okay. So you can caveat it. And there are also specific requirements for that to be done. Okay. That's also a different topic.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. My first question is, can I will any part of my estate to the church? And the second one is, if I inherit property from my late father, and it's a joint property, so I co-own it with a brother or a sibling, can I will my part of it to my children or whoever I so desire, when officially I don't own that property? I don't know if my question is clear. Yes, I don't own it because I don't have any official entitlement on it, but the property has been given to us, myself and my brother.
Okay.
How do we?
So if I can get you clear, that you are aware that the property has been willed to you.
Exactly.
But your father has not, passed on.
He's passed on.
He's passed.
Yes.
And it's been willed to you. It's been given to you.
Yes.
Okay. So I understand the question. Yes. Yes to the first question. that you can will, a portion of your property or your assets to the church. Because basically anybody who can hold property, and when I say hold property, who can own property in the sense of the word. So it can be a natural person or an artificial person, okay? Can be a beneficiary to a will. That is how come when Adote asked the question about the dispositions being made to an animal, it's very doubtful to me. So yes, you can will a portion of property to the church. With regards to the second question, yes, you can. Again, it goes to the issue of co-ownership I was talking about, because it depends on the nature of the co-ownership. If it's joint ownership in the technical sense of the word, okay, then you can't. All right. Where, for example, your father wills the property to yourself and let's say to another person jointly, then there's an issue because whoever dies surviving the first person, whoever survives takes the absolute benefit of the property. Yeah. And you see, this also creates confusion and conflict amongst, let's say the third generation. So let's say a grandfather wills a property to his children jointly. Okay, so in the technical sense of the word, jointly means that they own it jointly. Yeah. There's no indivisible, share. Also, there's no divisible share in the property. Whereas, if he had willed it to his, children to hold it as tenants in common, then it means that the children would can each will their share to their beneficiaries in turn. But where it is, disposed of jointly, then it means that should any of those children die, those children cannot will that property to any of the grandchildren. And usually the grandchildren will get up in arms later on and say that, oh, but our fathers had shares in that property. Yeah. But technically, joint ownership, whoever dies leaves his interest to the survivor. So the ultimate survivor, that is the last child of the grandparent who's alive, takes the absolute benefit of it all and can will it to his children. So it cuts out the rest of, the grandchildren, and it creates issues. So again, that's like some of these advices need to be preferred to you when you are drafting the will, so that you avoid some conflicts going forward. Yeah.
A follow-up. Okay. So in a situation where I will maybe let's say the way we set up our compound house. So there are 4, maybe chamber and hall self-contained there, and I have 3 children. Mm-hmm. That's okay. The first one has the first room, the second and the third in that order. But the last one is for my wife and children. Will I call that joint ownership, or the second term you use, tenancy, whatever? How will you describe that? And how can they will that particular one or share it for their own, to their own children?
So that is how come, again, some of our services are required. Because we know how to go around it. Because if you say to my wife and children, in what exactly are you talking about? Is it as tenants in common? Are you giving them jointly? Okay. And people would say, okay, fine, I'm giving it to my wife for life, and upon her death, the entire interest resolves to my children. Absolutely. So how does that really work? So you realize that during the lifetime of the wife, the children can benefit, unless the wife dies before the children can come in. So some of these things you actually need to seek legal advice to see how best you can administer the properties. Else, like I said, it also leads to conflict. Mm-hmm. But as one of my my teachers would say, if you think order is costly, try chaos. Try chaos. So someone would say that with all some of these challenges that may come out as a result of drafting, a will, why bother at all? And my answer to them is try chaos, where you have absolutely no control. You have administrators, and then even 50 years, because there are some pieces of litigation in court. Some go back as far as 90 years. Mm-hmm. Yes, because there was a disposition that was made somewhere in the 1910s.
Yeah.
And around 1970 or 16, that case is still in court because of faulty, disposition.
Mm.
So it's actually advisable that you seek proper advice when you are administering some of these assets to avoid, like I said,
Yeah.
some of these pitfalls.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think at this juncture, I know we have so many questions, but this is just a teaser. I think council kept mentioning that this is why their services are required. So please don't stay in your home and then express your wills as you intend it. Wedding is very important. Wedding is very important. So before we say our closing prayer, Auntie Abi will do that. I would just like to recognize Alfred, my brother Jeff, who is taking us to Swedro tomorrow. We thank you for being here the whole time. We have AB, we have Evelyn, and then all the others, Mrs. Mills, Anita, we miss you. All the others who have been online and kept faith with us, we say, may God richly bless you. And then to our lawyer, this is pro bono service. So in return, we say, may God richly bless you. And we are so grateful. Thank you. We'll say the closing prayer now and bring the program to an end.
Let's pray. Our Father, we thank you so much for this evening. We are grateful for these lessons that we've learned. We thank you for those who led out and for the knowledge that they've shared. Please help us to apply these things to our lives, that will make our lives better as your children, that will make us better stewards of all that you've blessed us with. We thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Auntie Abby. And so we say goodbye to our friends online till we meet again on a similar platform. God bless you all for coming. Thank you.
Recording stopped.